everyone, this is Veronica Kirilenko of the New American Magazine. We're in Washington, D.C. covering CPAC, and here with us today we have a very exciting guest. This is Rick Grenell, a former acting director of national intelligence. Thank you so much for being here.
I think the State Department should be a massive group of Foreign Service officers that explain to the world why an America First policy is good for them and why we do this is not for selfish reasons, but to make the world have a rules-based system. And so I would say that the opposite of America First is consensus with the world or consensus with the Europeans, because that means it's the lowest common denominator of a policy, and that's not good. We're seeing that that's not good. I'll give you one example. Chancellor Merkel explained to me many times when I was U.S. Ambassador to Germany that she wanted to have us not sanction the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. She was very adamant that I didn't understand, Trump and Americans didn't understand that Germany could control Russia, that they had a relationship with Putin that was different than ours, and that was never going to be a problem relationship. She explained that to me. And I would push back and say, I think you're wrong. And you're not paying your dues into NATO, and that is a signal to Putin that you're not serious about NATO. And I don't want to see NATO expansion when the current members of NATO aren't paying their fair share. Why are we extending the umbrella when the current people aren't paying up?
I'm sorry, and what if they did? What if they did pay enough? What if they did paid their fair share? Would you support the NATO expansion then?
Well, look, I think that is a huge if. That's a hypothetical that then we would have to see what happens. I mean, we've been asking the Germans, for instance, to pay up for 10 years. You know, the whole idea of paying 2% should be easy for the Germans. They have a budget surplus. Think about that. We in America have a $30+ trillion national debt. The Germans have a surplus. They get to the end of every budget year and they say, holy cow, we got new money, we got more money than we ever thought of. Let's go buy another opera house. And so that's not fair to the Americans.
Many observers believe that it is the NATO expansion eastward towards Russian borders that contributed to the tensions with Ukraine and eventually led to the war.
Look, I'm a 12-year diplomat. I'm about peace. I'm about peace proposals. I'm also a tough diplomat in that when you sit at the table of diplomacy, nothing is better for an American diplomat when you're negotiating a peace agreement than to have behind you the Pentagon, which doesn't negotiate and is a credible threat of military action. There's a difference between a threat of military action, which Joe Biden has, and a credible threat that Donald Trump had. I'll finish with this. I used to love it when Chancellor Merkel would say to me, the problem with President Trump is that I don't know what he's going to do. He's unpredictable. And I'd always laugh and smile and say, Madam Chancellor, that's the way it's supposed to be.
All right, you said that you are a diplomat with such an extensive background and experience, but I want to ask you this. We have, and America and other nations put in place such a sophisticated system of diplomacy, and we have all these international organizations such as the United Nations and the United Nations Security Council that was specifically set and established to prevent wars from happening, but yet here we are. What's your comment on that?
I mean, look, no international organization works without American leadership. Clearly the WTO allowing China to come in was a huge mistake. We thought that if we let the Chinese in, Bill Clinton decided to do that at the end of his term, that engagement with the Chinese would make them respect human rights more, work towards the rule of law. That did not happen. That was a mistake. And we need to be really honest to say when we let the Chinese into the WTO, they got worse. They really, honestly, dialed it back and went backwards. And so we should kick them out of the WTO. And I say that because the World Trade Organization should respect trade and agreements, and the Chinese are not. And so I've been at the UN for 8 years. I've been inside the Security Council. I know how the Chinese have manipulated the UN and other international organizations. Look at the WHO. Look what happened with COVID. As Director of National Intelligence, I saw the intel, and I can tell you that the Chinese covered up COVID. And the world should remember that, and there should be consequences, and I don't see enough.
And what do you want to see?
Say that again?
What do you want to see in terms of holding China accountable for COVID?
Well, I'll just tell you one idea that I've had that I've been pushing, and I think the time has come, is that if you're an American company that gets a sensitive government contract, whether it's about intel or defense issues or even the State Department, if you are an American company with sensitive contracts, you should not be working in China. I don't believe that you can put up the so-called Chinese wall and have a separation. I don't believe it exists. And so I think that Congress needs to act and make sure that those American companies working under sensitive contracts are not also working inside China.
Do you think that, with Senate voted yesterday asking Biden to declassify all documents related to COVID origins, and if it likely originated in Wuhan, China, then will put a pressure on China, and then China will go and embrace Putin, and it will be a powerful alliance that is very hostile to the United States. So what do we do then?
Yeah, look, I think there's two separate issues there. One, I'm for transparency. I don't think transparency is political. I think it's really important. And two, we should, as an American government, we should remember that China and Russia aren't natural allies, and that they have fundamentally different viewpoints, and we shouldn't lump them in. And certainly, I think the American strategy should be to have different relationships with them and not force them together.
All right, I want to ask you this. I know that you're on a tight schedule, so my last question is this. Recently, President Donald Trump released a very interesting anti-war campaign video in which he said, and I want to quote that, quote, "World War III has never been closer than it is right now. We need to clean house of all the warmongers and America-less globalists and the deep state, the Pentagon, the State Department, and the national security industrial complex." Does he make sense?
Yeah, I think that President Trump has experience with having the bureaucrats in Washington, D.C. do their own thing and undermine the elected message and messenger, right? When a president is elected by the people and they campaign on a certain message and principles, then the bureaucracy should salute. And if they can't salute, they should be fired. And so I believe that there are plenty of people at the State Department, enough people at the State Department that would do that. And for those that won't, they should be fired and they should move out.
How about the military-industrial complex? Is it a real force that drives the agenda on the Capitol Hill?
Yeah. Look, I will say this, is that I've seen over the last year our State Department and Secretary of State get shoved aside, and all we talk about is more money for the military option, more money for hardware. Where is Anthony Blinken? Where is the peace plan? Why did the Chinese come forward with a decent peace plan where the Ukrainians and the Russians both complimented it? And that's unacceptable. We're America. We're the United States of America, and we should have the peace plan, and we should be bringing people forward. But for some reason, Joe Biden has shoved Anthony Blinken aside, doesn't respect him, and the State Department is suffering because there's no ideas coming out of the State Department for peace.